Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Chalk Talk. We're happy you're here. I'd like to introduce Lori Matlin. She is a chaplain at Aurora Kenosha, and we're so glad to have her. And I'm very interested in this topic of the importance of self-compassion and care. So Lori, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So I'm wondering if we can just take a moment before we begin and just do what some of you know is a loving kindness meditation. It's going to be short, but I invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable, and if you'll indulge me in this. And if you're comfortable, you can put a hand over heart maybe. Take a breath in and let it go. And you can repeat these words silently to yourself after I say them aloud. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. Thank you. So our spiritual traditions have told us through the millennia, they've emphasized the importance of compassion and how it can transform lives. And our science now mirrors that for self-compassion in our brains, that shows changes in our brains and increase in resiliency. Self-compassion is deceptively simple, and so therefore it can be overlooked frequently. But if we are mindful in approaching it as a discipline, it can reap benefits into our lives. And the research shows that to us as well. So I'm hoping to show today how we might consider incorporating self-compassion into our caregiving lives. It might be particularly relevant for caregivers. And what my plan is to do the first part of my presentation on what self-compassion is and what it isn't. And then the last half of the presentation, I'd like to share some ideas on how we might incorporate self-compassion, and I'm hoping to get some ideas from you all as well. So we all know what the last 18 months have been like, that our normal is off. And with a pandemic and all the ambiguous loss that comes with that, we've adjusted as we've needed to. But some of that required us just to power through. And there's a cost to doing that. And the cost is often this being more prone anyway to burnout, or at least the possibilities. So that is the why. That's why I think that self-compassion might be particularly relevant to caregivers, particularly at this time. So when we think about cultivating well-being, we can do that through self-esteem or self-compassion, and both are very important. Self-esteem is a judgment or an evaluation of worth. Am I a good person or a bad person? And self-compassion literally means to suffer with. And so it's a response. It's a way of relating. So self-esteem, again, is really important, but there are some downsides that maybe weren't considered. Like in the 1990s, the movement was very strong in the psychological literature. They talked about this, what some people called the every child gets a medal movement. And there's particularly beneficial things for kids. But what happens when those of us, and some of the people possibly that are working in palliative care, when overachievers aren't winning? And then, and we see that with our patients as well for palliative care, that palliative care can be called in with what can be considered a failure. So what happens then? So psychologists started moving away from self-esteem alone and incorporating more of the self-compassion, because self-compassion offers the same well-being as self-esteem without the pitfalls. So some of you might remember the National Public Radio radio show, A Prairie Home Companion, where all the kids are above average, a statistical impossibility. But none of us want to be average. And so, that what he was stating in a sardonic sort of way was what all of us see for ourselves. We do mind tricks to help us feel above average and special. And so they use this word illusory superiority to talk about that, this idea that that we overestimate our own qualities when compared to other people. So, for instance, 93% of the drivers think they are better drivers than others. Surveys show that people think they are healthier, more attractive, more modest, even better able to see themselves than other people. So we have this comparative element, and we like ourselves when we're successful. And sometimes we can judge ourselves really harshly and with that self-critical voice when we don't meet our high standards. And then there's these pitfalls for narcissism. In fact, the social scientists who've been studying this for the last 3 decades, studying narcissism directly, have said that our current generation, the people that are in college right now, it's the highest level of narcissism that has been recorded, which is sort of interesting, right? Those are the sort of unintended consequences, maybe, of just using self-esteem by itself. So self-esteem is a fair weather friend. Self-compassion offers the more stable approach. Self-compassion steps in precisely where self-esteem falls down when we've made a mistake. And self-compassion may be especially important for caregivers. Self-compassion is linked to reductions in negative mind states, rumination, perfection, shame, and increases in things like self-confidence, optimism, curiosity, gratitude, the sort of things that we try to tell our patients as well. So we can better forgive ourselves for our mistakes and acknowledge and comfort ourselves in the difficulties in the caregiving role. So, I don't know if I can read it from where my thing is here. Extending kindness to ourselves means we see ourselves as human beings who are wonderfully made by God and valuable, yet who are imperfect and make mistakes. Spoken like she's not a chaplain, but that's exactly what a chaplain would say, that we are valuable and imperfect at the same time, this both and scenario. And so Kristin Neffs, who actually started the research into this, she started on the self-esteem portion of it. That's where she had done her original research at University of California, Berkeley. Then she started to say, she wanted to look into self-compassion. She started that in 2003. Since 2003, there's over 3,000 research studies that have been conducted on self-compassion. So, it is a newer type of a field, but I wanted to give a sampling of what her questions are and for her own self-compassion scale. She has you judge these statements on a scale of 1 to 5, the 1 being almost never, 5 being almost always. And we can use these statements to sort of ask ourselves, this is just a sampling, but they speak to me. I try to be understanding and patient towards those aspects of my personality I don't like. I try to see my failings as a part of the human condition. And when I'm going through a very hard time, I give myself the tenderness and caring I need. So I wanted to specifically address that type of thinking in terms of burnout. So a key danger for caregivers is burnout. And I don't know how many people are on here, but I would love to know from anybody on here some signs of what it is when you feel like the man over on the left with the arrows in his back. How do you know that you're approaching burnout? What are some of the signs for any of you? And Actually, yeah, if we could put them in the chat, that would be great, or speak out loud. Short fuse for sure. Exhaustion, yeah. Irritation, resentment, guilt, withdrawal, for sure. And so these are not signs of weakness, right? These are signs that we're human. And it's important to know that we all have limits to the amount of distress that we can bear before we start to become fatigued or shut down. So Kristin Neffs has the quote there: when caregivers continually give out to others, my thing is cut off, without being kind, caring, and supportive toward themselves, they'll eventually burn out. We need self-compassion to have the emotional energy needed to serve others. And what I like about that quote is two parts. One is the burnout part. The second part we're going to talk about in just a minute, this serving others. That gets to this idea of equanimity and this what it means to be of service to other people versus solving. But we're going to talk about that in a minute. The part that I really want to highlight here is the part about burnout, that the literature indicates that self-compassionate caregivers experience less burnout and compassion fatigue, more satisfaction with their caregiving role, and just better well-being all around. There we go. A common stumbling block that many people have is they think that if we're self-compassion, we let ourselves off the hook. It's just an excuse. And the literature actually says that that's not true, that the opposite is actually true, that people who practice self-compassion are actually more likely to take responsibility for their actions, and they can do it without beating themselves up. So when I think about this, my presentation here, and I'm stopping here for a moment and I'm thinking, how am I doing? Am I doing okay? If I'm doing good, wait, can I see anybody guys say thumbs up, thumbs down? All right, good. I just got a dopamine hit. Oh, thank you. I got a dopamine hit. I feel good. But if not, what now, right? And the good news is that we can train ourselves over time to build better capacity to deal with this. For me, I have to soften my inner critic. It's the first step I have to go to. But for, according to the literature and people that work in this field, some of the things they suggest is to start with this self-compassion break right in the moment, not at a later time when you're going through the hard time, to stop. And that stopping might be a stop sign to say, there's a lot going on. What do I need right now? And acknowledging the moment. This is tough. That might be one to do. Affectionate touch. So I invited you at the beginning of this to put a hand on your heart, maybe. Other people say to hug. My grandma used to pat my cheek. So I think of that sometimes. I don't necessarily do that, but I'll think of it, and it provides that moment of pause. Breath work is really important on any sort of meditative sort of thing. In compassion, what do they call it? Mindful self-compassion. They specifically have some breath work. So you breathe in compassion and you breathe out compassion. And then you can kind of modulate that according to what the need is. So it's a two-way flow. It's not just for me. You might breathe in for me and out for my patient. Or if I need more self-compassion for me, I breathe 3 breaths in for me and 1 for my patient. So, or vice versa. So breathing is an important aspect of it. The last one that I have listed there is equanimity. There is a specific program called Compassion with Equanimity, and equanimity is a wisdom practice that says that we just can't fix everything. And so we have to accept things as they are. And I thought Rachel Naomi Raymond, who is a wonderful writer and doctor, had a wonderful quote here about serving and this equanimity aspect of it versus our human tendency to want to fix, to solve, to do other things. So she says that serving requires us to know that our humanity is more powerful than our expertise. And in another place she says, service is a relationship between equals. Fixing and helping are draining, and over time we may burn out. So she gets directly to what they're talking about with equanimity. Kristin Neffs, who started this whole research trend into self-compassion, has a 3-part program for her self-compassion, how she suggests that it's approached. And the way that, this is the one that actually I've been practicing for the last several months. And the way that I remember it is to do the loving, connected presence and to remember those 3 aspects. But I approach it going backwards. And so I start with the presence. So I start in the yellow box. And the yellow box is mindfulness, neither ignoring nor exaggerating our feelings of failures. So that might look like, this is a tough moment. And just that stop, that pause in the middle of something, or this is a tough crowd. Whatever it is, it's that pause and recognizing without minimizing or exaggerating to allow, again, things to be exactly what they are. And then you can move into the second box, which is the sense of common humanity. Everyone goes through this. So you might say something like suffering is a part of life. You know, I am human. I'm vulnerable. I'm imperfect. And what she suggests is that this puts us as part of a shared human experience, and that people can feel this. Our patients can feel this, and our colleagues can feel this when we're part of this interconnectedness. And then the last box on the left is the self-kindness. That's the one, the red one. And it's understanding, not punitive. And that's where we probably need to spend the majority of our physical time in that moment of whatever it is that soothes us. Some of those things are from the slide before that we talked about, but also there's all of those may I sort of statements. And we're going to explore the may I statements on this slide. When I did the loving kindness meditation, just a portion of it, I did the self-compassion portion of it. That comes from the Buddhist tradition, or it's adapted from that anyway. A lot of work done with Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg on those sort of things. But in the self-compassion practice of it, what they suggest is that we come up with our own may I statements, because it may differ for each of us, and it's highly personal based on who we are and the experience that we're seeing in the moment. I actually have developed 3 or 4 statements that I have been practicing this more routinely for myself, and I do notice a difference. But some of the ones that you know, just to get us started, that are worth considering is, may I accept myself as I am? May I forgive myself? May I be able to care for and nurture myself so I can attend to the needs of others? Just saying them right now actually calms me down. And so, you know, it is this warmth and attention that gives us the mindful self-compassion. And so I end the presentation with John O'Donohue, the late great John O'Donohue, poet extraordinaire. And he was someone I read for a long time before I recognized that much of his poetry begins with may I, or may there, you know, the sort of idea that this gentle invitation, which is so prominent. So if you don't know John O'Donohue, I highly recommend that you look at him. And it's, again, the gentleness of the invitation that can be something that is soothing during a stressful time. As a chaplain, I'm reminded what all the great wisdom traditions teach us, this importance of sitting with our pain. So as hard as it is, suffering has something to teach us. And so to push it away is not a worthy goal. Honoring that as part of the fullness of our humanity, the feelings of loss or disappointment or anger or something else become an important aspect of that. So how well we can turn kindly inward, as he suggests, allows us to be more fully human and connected to others. And I believe it's a worthy goal to pursue, or something for us to consider as part of how we can address caregiver challenges, particularly in a time of a pandemic. And so now I would love to hear from any of you of how you're dealing from a place of self-compassion, and what things you may have brought into your practice, particularly in the last 18 months, of ways that you've been kinder to yourself. And I'm going to stop sharing, I think. I see we have some comments in there from before. These are things to show that we're getting closer to our burnout. Oh, this is interesting. Coming home feeling like a husk of myself and having nothing left for my family. Marty, that's yours. Yeah. Wow. That says a lot.
I think a lot of physicians find themselves, I think a lot of professionals find themselves in that position where they give everything that they can, and they know that it's time to go home because I've given everything that I can. But the pitfall of that is that when you come home, you're just this husk, and that's what your family gets to have. And so I've been trying to get better over these last few years at not stopping when I'm empty, but stopping a little bit sooner, so that way I have more to bring home with my family.
So I'm curious, Marty, based on that, would you consider any of the things that were suggested here? Would you think that they might be helpful for you?
Oh, absolutely. I forgiving myself for my humanity. Absolutely. There are things that I can't fix everything. I can't attend to every single patient. I have to set some limits for myself. But a lot of these same themes I see even in our palliative care work. I mean, it's pretty typical for us to normalize for our patients. And you can see how much our patients sort of slow down and their tension releases as you normalize their experience for them.
Yeah, it's interesting that we do it for our patients and we forget, or we encourage them to do it, but we forget to do it for ourselves.
Yes, just to piggyback on that, first of all, I want to thank you as always for the presentation and the reinforcement. I think that was great reminders. And to piggyback on the conversation just now, I think many of us, so I suspect I'm preaching to the choir, we're fairly far along on the spectrum of the awareness of the importance of self-compassion. Where we get stuck is the implementation sometimes. Just from what Marty said and others have said, yes, I know this is important and we try to do it, but it's easy to get sidetracked from all the external stuff that comes in.
Yeah, that is so true. It fosters in my brain immediately, like, how can we have stop signs that sort of encourage us to take those moments?
Well, I would add, on the days where I don't even get a lunch because I'm basically cramming food in my mouth and farting, those are the days that I need this the most, but those are the days that I have the least amount of capacity, or I feel like I have the least amount of capacity to actually implement it. So that's the balance and the challenge, I think, that sometimes occurs.
I think,
Oh, go ahead, Ruth. I'm sorry.
yeah, I think the challenge I have is so being aware of how important rest is, and then like scheduling rest into my life and then realizing that my rest really isn't rest. And so figuring out what rest really means, how to just be.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit right before this started that there is sort of a divide in how self-care is thought of versus self-compassion. And self-care is really, really important. But self-care can be something that's like, how am I going to take care of myself when I go home or when I'm, over my lunch or whatever. And the idea of what I think, Jerry, you were talking about earlier, that it's that mindful practice of it. It's cultivating the practice in the moment of that it doesn't have to necessarily take a lot of time, but it has to be the awareness to say, stop. This is a tough moment. I'm human. May I be gentle with myself? How long did that take? But we don't do that. We say, push harder, solve the problem, and then everything will be okay. So it's sort of which comes first, right? It's accepting as it is and allowing it to be. But we tell ourselves that we got to fix the problem first. And then we'll get rest.
It's an unfortunate in our lives too. I think that at times, not only do we have to sort of stick up for ourselves and what we need for our self-care, but there are other times where we have to also navigate complexities of other people's judgments of what they think we should be able to handle, or of what they think we should, be able to take on, and recognize that their judgments of our own self is not what the important piece is, whether it's family judging you or colleagues judging you, or anyone in life, really standing up for your own space and your own needs, and recognizing that other people's interpretations of that cannot be fully formed because they don't know the whole story of who you are and what space you need. And it can be hard to stand up for that and push those judgments aside sometimes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for voicing that. There's something to be said about saying, loving yourself through that process, right? And saying, yeah, I've got tough people around me and it's really hard. And I'm going to love myself for all I'm worth. It's not easy. It's not easy. I just am looking through. I don't know if there were any other, but feel free to, anybody else have any comments?
I had a question, Lori. I know on your slide, and I snapped a quick picture of it because I knew I'd forget exactly what my question was unless I saw the picture, but you said you reverse Kristin Neffs' 3 elements of self-compassion, and you always do presence first and then go back the other way. Do you go presence connected loving, or do you go presence loving connected? And I wanted to know why you chose to go with presence first.
Because it's for me, and actually everything I've read on it as well, it's the stop sign, right? It's our brains frequently can spiral out of control. And we think, oh, this is disastrous and the family isn't going to show up and they're going to, whatever it is. And it's that stop sign. And to say, this is hard. This is, whatever. And it sort of sets the moment. And then, and then putting yourself as part of a bigger group, to me, it just makes sense to do it that way. And then the last thing is the soothing portion of it, the loving portion of it, that almost always takes the most time, right? Whether it's breath work or anything else. And so it's spending the time where you need to spend the time. And then when your mind says, yeah, but it shouldn't be this way, it's like, no, this is exactly what it's supposed to be right now. I'm going to love myself regardless of, loving myself isn't exactly the language that they're using, but I tend to do that. May I be gentle, with myself through that anyway. But I think loving connected presence, that's a phraseology that just goes off the tongue. So I remember it that way, and then I work it off backwards. But I encourage you to figure out ways that work for you. But I really would highly encourage the may I statements and to play with them so you have them ready when you're in a situation.
Well, thank you, Lori, for this beautiful reminder and for this lovely topic. And I hope everyone remembers to give themselves a little bit of self-compassion today and on the days forward. And I hope everyone has a beautiful Friday. Thanks for joining us.